Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor to be here. As your colleague said, I am a chiropractor and I'm a longtime friend of Gary Ruby's. In fact, I was in grade 10 and Gary's in grade 9, and we hooked up and got in a lot of trouble in high school together, and now we're working to do good in the world. So all things come full circle. And it's probably the last time I was in this building was when I was 12 years old. And my reason I was here is because my father was a 30-year veteran of the Waterloo Regional Police Force. And in fact, my father was one of the guys who set up all the regional policing when it went regional. He was on the Kitchener Police Force, and then he was one of the guys who integrated the regional policing. And he's a cop's cop. You know, he was in the homicide division, he started the morality division, he started the narcotics squad, he was an organized crime guy, he was a specialist in that, and he retired as staff inspector. And he's number 5 on the list out there of deceased members on the plaque on the wall. So it was gave me goosebumps coming in this morning and seeing that plaque and seeing my dad's name up there. And that name got me out of a lot of trouble, I can tell you, in high school. I don't know if there's any veterans here, but 2 things I was thinking about when I was driving down. My office is in Mississauga. I was thinking about all the times in high school when I got pulled over in my dad's car for doing something stupid, and it came to that time where they wanted to see my driver's license, and they looked at the name, and they looked at me, and they said, "Should I know your father?" And I said, "Absolutely." And they said, "Well, don't ever let me catch you doing something stupid like this again, and drive home safe." So I remembered that. I also remembered a time where one of my dad's guys, Ed Westfall, he came over by the house. Guys were dropping in and around the house all the time. And Mr. Westfall came in and grabbed my brother's hockey stick and came down the left wing and took a wrist shot and hit me right in the eye, gave me a big black eye. And it was awesome because I owned Ed Westfall for a long time. Candy bars, chips, whatever I wanted. He felt so guilty about that. And then I started thinking about the times when my dad would have his squad over and they would decompress, and it usually ended up with, the night ended with a bottle of rum on the dining room table with the cap off and a bag of ice on the dining room table melting all over my mother's good dining room table. And that didn't always turn out so well for my dad. But my dad was a great guy, he was a great cop. And I'm going to tell you that one of the reasons I'm proud to be here is because my dad passed away when he was 66 years old, and stress killed my father. And so you might be thinking, what's a chiropractor got to do with PTSD and operational stress disorder? And I just want to share a little bit about the stress response and where it ties in. How many people have any experience with chiropractic? And how many people have had good experience with chiropractic? Great. Anybody have bad experience? Because I know it happens. I'm the past president of the College of Chiropractic of Ontario, but it doesn't happen very often. And so if you'd like, I'd love to chat with you afterwards about that. But I am a chiropractor. I've been a chiropractor since 1985. Ended up practicing in Mississauga. And just to give you a little bit of history about Gary and I, Gary would drop into my office. He was a appeal cop, and he would drop in whenever he was in a crisis. Anybody use chiropractic care for crisis care? Like you can't move your neck or you can't move your back, right? So he would come in when he was in a crisis, and when the crisis was over, he'd disappear. And I'm kind of an intuitive sort of fellow, and so I knew that most of what was driving Gary's crises was emotional stress that he wasn't dealing with, and that he was running away from. And he came in, I'll tell you, in some states from time to time. And then a number of years ago, I think it's going on 7 years now, right? He came in and he was broken. He was really broken emotionally and mentally. And he was at the end of his rope. And I sat him down and I said, "Listen, pal, now we're going to do it my way." And my way in chiropractic is I take very specific care of the upper neck. It's called upper cervical specific technique, keeping the brain stem clear, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes. And Gary crumbled at that point in time, and he said okay, and he committed to it. He came in 3 times a week until we could get his neck clear and stabilized, and I believe it's been a big part of his progress, and a big reason that he's where he is today, along with all the other good work that he's done for himself. So now you might be thinking, wow, this guy's sounding kind of weird. He's saying he can help a guy who's strung out, who's got multiple addiction, who's suffering from PTSD by moving the top 2 bones in his neck around. And I'm saying, yeah, absolutely. And see, it all comes back to this thing we call the stress response. Everybody's heard of the fight or fight response, right? And so we always think that that response is a bad response. And in fact, the stress response is a good response. It's got survival value. It saves your life when you're in a pinch because it allows you to take action. So that response is designed and developed so that you can go into that fight or flight response and either run for your life or fight for your life. It's designed to get you out of that stressful situation, but when you shift out of that stressful situation, you're supposed to shift out of the stress response as well. Does that make sense? And so what happens if somebody gets locked into this chronic fight or flight response, this chronic stress response, changes start to happen in the body. And keeping it very, very simple, what happens in your body when you're locked into this chronic fight or flight response, this chronic stress response, is your gut shuts down, so you start to develop digestive disorders. Your hormones shut down and you shift out of balance because you're thinking about surviving, you're not thinking about reproducing at that point in time, right? Your blood pressure goes up, your heart rate goes up, your sweat glands get activated, your brain chemistry changes. There's a structure in the brain called the amygdala that starts going crazy, throwing out chemicals that make you more aggressive, that drives rage. And everything in your body shuts down except the amygdala and the adrenal gland. And the adrenal gland starts pouring something into your body called cortisol. And cortisol rises your blood sugar up, raises up cholesterol, makes you more aggressive again, drives blood pressure up. That's what drives the fight or flight response. And so when you're living in this state, it's a breakdown state. And it also changes your brain chemistry. That changes your mood and drives mood disorders. So how can we shift ourselves if we're locked into this response? How can we shift ourselves out of this response? Well, you probably know some things you can do already. You can meditate, and that'll help. Vigorous exercise will help. Prayer will help. Drugs won't help. They'll cover it up. Alcohol won't help. You'll feel better while you're there, maybe, but you'll actually fuel the stress response. So a chiropractic adjustment, when we make that adjustment, actually pulls you out of the stress response. It pulls you out of the fight or flight response, especially when we remove the interference at the top of the neck here. And very simply stated, all the vertebrae are joined together through joints. And the joints at the back of the spine and the front of the spine are very, very richly supplied with sensory nerves. And there's 2 types of sensory nerves in these joints. They're called, the fancy term is mechanoreceptors. And there's 2 types of mechanoreceptors. And we're going to keep it really simple. There's good mechanoreceptors and there's bad mechanoreceptors. So when your spine is lined up properly and moving properly, all the good mechanoreceptors are firing, and they send sensory input into the brain stem, where it then goes up to the higher centers in the brain and drives normal brain function, normal brain chemistry, and a relaxed state of physiology, which is reparative, regenerative in nature. That's where we're supposed to live from. If the top 2 bones in our neck are out of alignment, or any of the spinal bones are out of alignment, these good mechanoreceptors are shut off and bad mechanoreceptors start firing. The fancy name are nociceptors. And nociceptive fibers are designed to signal the brain when there's damage or when there's a perceived threat. So that means even emotional stress can trigger nociceptive input. And so when these nociceptors fire, they shut the good mechanoreceptors down and they switch us into that fight or flight response. And it really is as simple as that. So if once you're there, and once that spine locks up, you're locked into that stress response. And new studies being done just in the past 6 months show that a chiropractic adjustment clears the nociceptive, shuts off the bad mechanoreceptors, turns the good ones back on, and creates an influence right up here in the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain that drives all the good emotions and well-being and proper cognitive function and all of that good stuff. So my job all day long, and I'm not taking anything away from other modalities, but with the research that reported that showed is that only a chiropractic adjustment can make that change up in the brain, and only the chiropractic adjustment creates a lasting change. Doesn't mean you shouldn't be doing other things like yoga and massage and Reiki and all of those things. They're all awesome things, but chiropractic, like all of those other tools, has its own unique role to play. And so that's the brunt of my practice. I check people for nerve interference for something called a subluxation, which is this locking or misalignment of the vertebra that changes the input into the system. And I'm always telling my patients, you know, because I use a computerized scanner to tell me when there's interference present or not, and I'm horrible on computers. And I always tell my patients, you know, a computer's only as smart as the person using it, and mine's pretty stupid, right? Well, your brain is only as smart as the input it's receiving. And this has been known and studied since the early 80s. A guy named Sperry won a Nobel Prize for his research on mechanoreceptor input into the brain. And in his research, he said proper spinal movement is like food for the brain. So there's a lot of people walking around and they're locked into this chronic stressed physiology, and it's because their spine's in lockdown. And as soon as we can open that spine up, everything starts to reverse itself over time. And the other thing we do in our clinic that has really helped Gary is I do one of the outcome measures I use is something called heart rate variability, and so it measures basically the dance between your breathing rate and your heart rate. And we know that when we're in good coherence, which is when the heart is running the brain, basically, it's really fascinating. In recent years, and a lot of this research comes out of a place called the HeartMath Institute. We know we have a brain up here, but they've identified another brain called the heart brain. And the heart brain sends more sensory information up to the brain, more input up to the brain than the brain sends to the heart. Got that? The heart sends more messages to the brain than the brain sends to the heart to run the heart. And we know that when we're in coherence, which is when our heart brain is dominating the situation, that's when we're in a relaxed physiology. When we're in that state of coherence, the heart's actually producing 3 different hormones. And if you put those 3 hormones into a petri dish filled with cancer cells, 97% of the cancer cells will be dead in 24 hours. And we also know that this heart brain feels things before they happen. We know the brain senses things before they happen, or it can sense things before they happen. The heart brain feels them before the brain senses them. So we want to live from this heart brain. We want to learn to live from that. And I'm sure if you're a first responder, you've had these moments of gut feelings and intuition and instinct, and you've learned to follow them and trust them. And then that's where we want to live from. And we know, and again, and we know from research, and I see it in my office all the time, that when we make an adjustment up here, it puts people into a state of coherence and opens up their heart brain. So they can start living from that intuitive space, which then drives this relaxed physiology and better brain chemistry. The other way you can open this heart space up is simply by breathing. And it's interesting, I've done a lot of work with native elders in the past. And I learned a breathing technique from a native elder, and this fella studied all the major philosophies and cultures in the world, and he discovered that all religions and all philosophies use some form of meditation. We might call it prayer, we might call it chanting, we might call it meditation. But what he noticed was they all use some form of meditation, and all meditations involve some sort of a concentration point. What this fella noticed was that all other forms of meditation use external concentration points. I grew up Roman Catholic, so we used hymns and prayers, right? There might be chants, you might do a mantra, but it's all external. And he thought, meditation's great, but if you're kind of feeling a little stressed and shut down and you're standing on the corner of Yonge Street and you start chanting, it might create a little more stress in your life rather than less, right? So he developed this breath work that uses the breath as a concentration point. It's an internal concentration point. And so it was kind of neat when I started looking at the HeartMath Institute's work to find out their main vehicle to help shift people into this state of coherence is breath. And so, and the neat thing about that is we all breathe, right? And so as you start to do this and you become more aware of your breath, and that becomes your habit, every time you breathe, you're actually pulling yourself back into this relaxed physiology. It becomes your habit, as long as you remain aware of your breath. So we can all maybe, I know it's the dreaded post-lunch speaking spot I'm filling right now, that the carbo load going. That'll be counteracted with caffeine at the afternoon break, right? But if you all just, you can keep your eyes open or closed, but just focus on your breath for a few minutes for me. And this is what Gary would come into the office, I'd scan his neck. If he needed an adjustment, I'd adjust him, and then I have him rest for 20 minutes or half an hour, which is a chore because he doesn't like to sit still, right? But we lay him down and I just have him breathe. And we taught him this breathing work, and we did a pre and post heart rate variability test on him, and the results are phenomenal. So if you all just, as you're sitting, just become focused on your breath. And don't try and change it, just become aware of it. And people become aware of their breath in different ways. Some people will focus on the rise and fall of their diaphragm as they're breathing in and out. Other people will become focused on the sound that the air makes as it's moving through the airways, and still others might just focus on the feeling of the air as it moves over your lips or your nostrils. But just really go inward and put all of your attention on your breath. And you might notice that almost immediately your thoughts start to slow down. You still have thoughts running through there, but the velocity of the thoughts start to slow down. And if a thought comes into your mind, just let it drift on through like it's a leaf floating by in a river. And continue to just focus on your breath. And as you focus on your breath, now just consciously lengthen your inspiration a little bit. Maybe breathe in for a 3 count. And pause at the end of the inspiration. And then breathe out in equal measure. And as you start to lengthen that breath, imagine that you're not breathing through your nose, but you're breathing through the center of your chest, here where the heart lives. You almost feel an expansion. in your chest area. And that's your heart brain waking up. And if you think of something that brings you joy or peace or that makes you feel love, you can intensify the opening. And I usually think of my pets to do that, because pets are easier to love than humans, I've found over the years. So you might think of a puppy or a kitten, or a newborn baby, or a loved one, or a time where you just felt love. And as you remember that experience, just focus on your breath and notice how your heart space opens up. And the researchers have measured the EMF, the electromagnetic field the heart puts out. It's 5,000 times bigger than the electromagnetic field the brain puts out. It connects us. And they've measured people's heart field out to 12 meters. That's big, right? And just doing that breath that we did in the last 5 minutes can bring you there. Having a nervous system that's clear of interference, because you're seeing a chiropractor and you have good input into the system from your spinal joints, coupled with this breath, can bring you there. And it's not about back pain. It's not about neck pain. I sat on my ass all weekend watching the Ryder Cup, and my back is sore as hell right now. I don't need an adjustment, but it's not, chiropractic's not about back pain. It's about keeping this nervous system clear with the understanding that it runs our entire physiology. And that when we couple that up with what we know about the heart and the heart brain, it's magical. And that's really what I came to share with you today. And I'm blessed in that I get to travel all over Canada and the world, in fact, to share the chiropractic message and to help train chiropractors. And so I have a network of chiropractors available to me, and if anyone would like to investigate chiropractic care and you get in touch with me, I've got some cards at the back with Gary. If you get in touch with me, I will hook you up with a good, solid chiropractor in your community. And that's what I got to share with you today. Thanks for being so
Okay. We are going to have two good friends of mine, Brad and Sid, come up, and they're going to be speaking about moral injury and distinguishing a moral injury from post-traumatic stress. Somebody know where Brad and Sid have gone to?
Hi, folks. We didn't know we were supposed to be on right now, so if we look a little dense, because we just got surprised. But we're happy to be here. Just a little background. Back in 2010, we talked about Peter Platt a little bit earlier this morning. Peter Platt. Is that me? Technical stuff. So we talked about Peter Platt being the founder of Badge of Life Canada back in 2010. And Peter was looking at what was available for police officers throughout Canada in terms of resources. And we had the federal government making announcements that there was going to be some funding and support for first responders. This gets scary here. In terms of what's available for them, they had an application that was available for them to look at whether they were potentially suffering from PTSD, etc. And there was some various programs at various hospitals that were funded by the federal government. What we found out was, unfortunately, there is a divide in the policing world. If you work for the RCMP, you aren't getting money from the same bank the military gets. It's a federal funding. So as municipal and provincial police officers, we didn't have access to the same resources that were available to the military and to members of the RCMP, them being federal employees. So Peter wanted to do something to help municipal and provincial police, their families, their civilian members, First Nations police and corrections, to help them have the resource availability to them that was offered to many of the military and the federal police, the RCMP. And he started Badge of Life Canada based on what he saw in the United States called Badge of Life USA. And he became a very strong advocate to support municipal and provincial police through his Badge of Life work. But he was also approaching it from a very angry perspective. So any story where any of our officers were injured or suffering from trauma, he became aggressively, he would aggressively attack the organizations for not helping their members the way they should. In 2012, he gave me a call and he wanted to know if I would be willing to help him with his Badge of Life Canada work. He was doing it on his own time. He developed everything on his own. And at the time, I shared with him that I would be more than happy to help, but I wanted to approach things from a more constructive perspective rather than an advocate angry perspective. At which time he agreed to allow me to vet anything that he blogged or sent out and try to tone it down a bit. And next thing I knew, Peter was telling everybody that Badge of Life Canada was co-founded by Sid Gravel and Peter Platt. And I was honored that he would consider that I was co-founding, but I think the only thing I co-founded was us being a little bit more polite. So, anyways, I share that with you because Peter and I worked very hard for several years together to create a list of resources available to our provincial and municipal police, First Nations, and corrections. And last year, Peter was diagnosed with stage 5 cancer. And it was hard for me to think of what would happen to Badge of Life Canada without Peter, because he is Badge of Life Canada. And we reached out to Bill and Lynn Rusk and asked if they would look at taking over the work that Peter had done. And it goes to show how much work he did. We had to ask 2 people to replace Peter. And Bill and Lynn are just working tremendously to continue what Badge of Life Canada can and will continue to do for others. And I would encourage people to to support these kinds of organizations that are at the ground level. You know, our presence is validated by our integrity, our stories are real, we are at the ground level, and we truly believe that what we are offering people is what they need because we need it. And so today we hear that Peter is not well. We got word today that he has decided that he's ready to leave. He's in palliative care. So I don't know if we even will end the day with Peter to us. That being said, I'd like to just share that little bit of information with you and go on to the subject at hand, the third pillar of mental health. This is a very topical subject, and a lot of people are not familiar with why this is important, but it is, very much so. And as I go through the slides, I'll share with you some real life stories as to why this is important for us to know about this third pillar. And it's because we know, for example, that for the most part, as you heard already today, there are some medical responses to us to help us deal with trauma, stress and trauma, whether it's medication or marijuana, whatever it is that we feel is necessary to help the body heal with some of the chemical imbalances that we experience. We know about that. We also know that there's a whole lot of work that's done for the mind. There's all sorts of therapies that are available, and I'll go through a few of those in a minute. So the thing is, the problem is, from our perspective, is that if we just deal with the body and the mind, doctors tell me that research is showing that we're only achieving a 33% success rate in terms of people recovering or dealing well with the fact that they have PTSD. And I always hesitate to use statistics because every time I hear people talk, statistics seem to be a shifting thing that fit the need, and it's sort of like what you get when you come out of the University of MSU, which is the university that makes shit up. You know? So, however, I do know enough to say that if you don't deal with the soul component of being injured, you haven't really dealt with the entire person. And so let's look at some of the therapies they have for the mind in the next slide. Those are some of the things a lot of us in this room are probably familiar with. CPT, narrative therapy, all of those things that are available to us. And the success rate is not as good as we would like it to be for those of us who are suffering of these traumas. But it's all that we have at this point in time. But I truly believe that we have to look beyond the mind, we have to look beyond the physical symptoms. One of the reasons why it became evident to me is because I started to realize after my shooting incident, I had two shooting incidents. Actually, before I joined the police service, I was imprisoned along the border of Mozambique as a suspected mercenary during the Frelimo Revolution. So I had 10 days in a prison camp, which I didn't think affected me at all because I was 21 years old and really felt like I was made out of rubber. And did another 2 years in Africa in spite of that. And came to Canada, joined the police service. Within 2 weeks on the job, I shot my first suspect. So that made it rather unusual for me as a police officer. And I certainly gained a reputation right off the bat with the police service as to what kind of a police officer I was going to end up being. And 8 years later, I shot my second suspect. And the thing was, with the second suspect, that's where it really hit me, because I shot him on the basis that I was convinced he was armed by all his actions and his behavior. And when I went up to him and rolled him over to pull his hand out from the front of his pants, he had no gun. And so for me, the damage, the shock, the horror, the trauma was about the decision-making process. Didn't have a problem doing what I had to do as a police officer. But once I realized what happened, what I had a problem with was the decision living with that decision, because I went home, and for weeks thereafter, in my mind, there was this constant repetition of, did I react too fast? Did I miss something? Did I miss something? Did I miss something? And I couldn't get away from that broken record that kept going on in my mind. And no amount of therapy or medication would help me address the decision process. And there's where I struggled. And so it's important for us to talk about the soul. So where does a moral injury fit in? Well, here's what it is. We know that a broken bone will not necessarily kill anyone. But we do know that the infections or the hemorrhaging that occurs as a result of having a broken bone can kill you. We know that. We have a lot of elders who break their hips and they die of pneumonia and infection. It's not the broken hip that killed them. Moral injury is the infection to PTSD. It's the hemorrhaging of PTSD. So we know that there's chemical imbalances, we know that there's self-care therapy, but if there's a moral injury, if there's a decision-making component, then that's a hemorrhaging or an infection to the PTSD that has to be addressed as well. And the moral injury is subjective. It's personal, it pivots with the dimensions of time, and it may be linked to cognitive development. So we can't assume that whatever works for one person when it comes to moral injury will work with everyone, because we all have our own personal perspective in our upbringing as to what's right and what's wrong. For soldiers, it's a very difficult situation where they go into the battle and they're wearing their uniform and they come home and they take their uniform off. Suddenly, for some, it's very difficult for them to disconnect from the person that they were wearing the uniform to the person that they are being at home, being a parent, etc. Next slide. So it debilitates us because no matter how much you tell me that I don't need any more medicine, no matter how much you tell me that I'm doing all the right things for self-care, no matter how much you pat me on the back and tell me that I'm a hero, that I've done everything that could possibly have been done, that I did all the right things according to the courts even, that I'm not going to be charged with any criminal offense because we truly believe that you made the only decision that you could make, I still feel like a piece of shit. And that's the problem. Because ultimately it's contrary to everything that I'm made of and why I became a police officer that I shot someone who was unarmed. Regardless of the fact that I couldn't know any better, I did what I had to do. The fact is it happened, and it becomes something I can't deal with, and I struggle with that. There's extreme shame and guilt, betrayal, regret, anxiety, anger, self-loathing, and self-harm that comes with this moral injury part. It's the going to a soccer game and not wanting to stand with the other parents because you're afraid that they're going to see that they see you as someone who's killed somebody. It's going to the school and being afraid for your children because you're front page news in terms of the fact that something happened. And folks, I'm giving you the perspective from a police officer who's been involved in a shooting. But I can tell you, for example, for firefighters who are at the base of a ladder looking up at a building and they see a face in the window and they know there's a person in there, but they can't go up the ladder because the building's going to collapse. So they make the decision to step back and wait because they can't do anything. That's a decision that they're living with. The paramedics who have 4 people at the side of a road in a car accident, all of them needing treatment, but you've only got 1 ambulance. And the next one's half an hour away, and 2 people are going to be put in the ambulance. You've got a triage, and then you lose one that you triage off the ambulance. These are decisions that some of us live with that we can't, and we have difficulty with, because no matter how much we know we did the right thing, the decision hurts us, and the consequences of the decision hurt us. Now, one of the problems with PTSD treatment is that it focuses on eliminating the fear, right? We know trauma is about fear, horror, hopelessness, or helplessness. So we treat this fear factor. You know, you're safe. This is a safe environment. You're surrounded by friends. You know, we're going to use self-care, think things through, don't put yourself through anxiety issues, don't create any panic issues. But the problem is that moral injury has nothing to do with fear. There's no fear issues with regards to the 2 shooting incidents I was involved in. Certainly there was no fear issues for me being in the prison camp. I wasn't the guard, I was just a prisoner. But the problem is that we don't deal with the internal ethical conflicts when it comes to decision-making process. So as long as PTSD is viewed as only 2 pillars, and we take care of the fear component, we never deal with that 3rd pillar, which is, regardless of how much you treat with fear, I still feel internally like it's difficult for me to live with the decision I had to make. So PTSD or PTS is about the trauma we survived. Moral injury is about the damage left by the decisions made. It creates a false or a flawed sense of who we are. For some who come out of the battlefields, whether it's the battlefields of trying to save lives as a paramedic, firefighting, or a police officer or a soldier. For some of us who come out of the battlefields, we're able to take the uniform off and separate the uniform from the self. And we're able to go home and have a good evening and a good time with our families. But for those of us who can't separate it, then what happens is the uniform never comes off. It doesn't come off, and I'm not talking about the physical side of it, but the whole psychological side of taking that uniform off and leaving it at work. I remember when I retired, I shared with my wife that I had no idea how heavy the uniform was until I took it off for that very last time. I really had no idea how heavy that uniform was until I took it off for that very last time, knowing full well I never had to put it on again. And then I started to realize every time I went to work after my 2nd shooting, every time I opened up the locker, I had a hard time getting in the locker room, but once I was there, it was okay because there was a whole bunch of other people who didn't want to be at work that day. And then I would open up the locker and I'd pull my gun belt out and put my gun on, and then I'd always think, shit, is this the day when this is going to happen again? Because I sure didn't know about the first 2 happening. They just happened. So I always worried about that for all those years. Next slide. So there's a problem, of course, with the conflict and confusion that arises between the second self and the present self. We can't transform from memory to present. You know, and that was the difficulty for me. I would go into trances for hours, just going over the event again and trying to figure out, you know, where did that decision come from? Where did that moment come when I felt I had to draw and shoot? You know, and trying to figure it out. They eventually put me in charge of training. The last 10 years of my career, I spent 20 years on patrol. The last 10 years of my career were in training and recruiting. And I oftentimes, when we were training people in the range on use of force, I kept asking myself as we were training them, you know, are we giving them the tools that they need in terms of addressing the situation? Okay, that was a good decision, but was it a good decision you can live with? You know, is it a good decision for you as well, not just for the organization and for the public? You did what you had to do, but can you live with it? Can we have that conversation? We never did. And you get into that self-destructive loop, which I talked about. Yeah. So why is it taking so long to get serious about moral injury? Well, within the industry itself, we haven't asked the right questions in terms of dealing with the question, the decision-making process. Fear-based models of care work, and we want to go with what works. So we stick to what works, though we're starting to question if it works well enough. Shame and guilt are not targeted in CBT. We may have shame in disclosing the truth about I felt terrible. I thought the decision was a poor decision in spite of the fact that everybody says it was a good decision. Clinicians may feel helpless in their ability to help someone who says, it's the decision that I made that I can't live with. And we sometimes talk about the soul and the moral injury as being spiritual, and then people get afraid, well, what's this? How does religion fit into this? And it's got nothing to do with religion. It's the spirit. It's the soul. It's the flame inside us that is going to get turned off if we don't fix this. And when it turns off, then we get depressed and there's no point in living. You know, this is what worries me about this not being addressed. Dr. Jonathan Shea, a very highly experienced doctor with Veterans Affairs in the United States, states the following, and I was very pleased to see this because I'm a strong peer builder. I'm founder of Robin's Blue Circle post-shooting trauma team back in 1988, and I've been involved in the development of dozens of peer support groups throughout Canada, all in different names and different formats. People who have called and over the years have asked me for advice on how to do it, since I've been doing it since 1988. It's been a long time. And he says that peers are the key to recovery. It's the veterans themselves healing each other that belong at the center stage, and the professional mental health workers are the stage hands. It's not to say that we can write off clinical care. It's important, but we cannot ignore the importance of peer support. About 3 months ago, I participated in a program called Sparta, and I'll bring this to your attention now. Not to push one program over another, but basically, for the first time in my life, in 28 years, 13 police officers and soldiers, all of them highly decorated, highly admired for the many years that they served, were put in one room. And we were put in one room for one reason only. Each and every one of us had attempted suicide. And yet we had all gone through medical care and therapy, and each and every one of us had attempted suicide. And when we got together in that room, I remember walking in and seeing the faces of people that understood what was bothering me, because it was the same thing that was bothering them. It was a whole moral injury. You can be an excellent soldier on the battlefield, but if you can't leave the battlefield there, if you bring that home, then you are not disconnecting with what hurts. And so we spent a week together, and at the end of it, we were laughing and smiling and recovering nicely, and we became a family, as Bill sometimes refers to. We became a tribe. And we recognize each other, 13 of us, by our lambda sign, which Bill has used quite often. But for all of us, it was for the first time that we met people who could look at us and listen to us and say, me too, me too. So it wasn't about my story is better than your story that got me here. It's about, I'm here because I'm hurting in spite of all the therapy and medicine I've taken. I'm still dealing with the struggle of disconnecting self from the uniform. And the other person would say, me too. And I knew then that I was with people that understood. It was about me too. And it's amazing when you hear that, how wonderful it works for you. And it was peers that, it was being with those peers for that 5 days that really gave me, for many years, a sense finally that somebody really did understand the moral injury that I've been talking about for all these years. Right? So peer support, this is a definition, folks, that I put together as a result of doing it for 28 years, so I'd like to think it's a good definition. Peer support is a foundation piece that connects with empathy, not sympathy. It gets them through the need, medical, psychological, and supports them through the process until they're strong enough. Lets them go without obligation. You don't owe me. I'll spend years with you, helping you go to your appointments, making sure that you're feeling positive, good about yourself, and you owe me nothing. No one mental health service product can stand on its own. It all needs to work as one for the benefit of the sufferer. That to me is a true definition of peer support. And as I said, that's something I put together after 28 years of experience, so it means something to me, and it means something to a lot of others as well. Right? So there's a YouTube here that we're going to try and show you. I don't know if we can get that going there. Maybe we just double click on it. Okay, let's just double click on it. We're just going to bring it up on YouTube. Yeah. So what happened here is, how many of you are familiar with Brené Brown?
Yes.
Right. Brené Brown does a wonderful job here of explaining the difference between empathy and sympathy. And I think it's an important video to see if we can find it here. If we can't find it here, I'm going to give you some homework, because you all have to go look for it. It's called Brené Brown, Empathy versus Sympathy, YouTube. And if we can find it, that's great. You'll see it. If we can't find it, we'll have you look for it at home, and you'll watch it. And when you watch it, suddenly all of this will, there it is right there. Cartoon one. There it is, yeah. Oh, gotta skip an ad here.
Free ad.
Yeah, free ad. Wait till the penguin does his trip there for the credit card. Well, we can skip the ad there now. There we go. Great.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy,
I'm gonna mirror it.
We'll get through it here, folks. It's just a small technical glitch. We've got it here on the screen. We just got to put it up there for you to see as well. There we go. Yeah.
You gotta mirror it there, Bill. The mirror thing.
Brad, did you want to add anything to this?
Mirror.
Absolutely.
Settings.
It's a great opportunity for us to share with you. Between Sid and I, we have over 55 years of peer support experience. Sid created Robinson Circle in Ottawa, and I created a lot of the peer support programs in and around York Region, York Regional Police, and York Region CISM. So together with our experience, we're here to share with you. And despite 55 years, we know that there's such a great amount of experience in here as well. And this is an awesome opportunity for us to share experiences with each other, and together we're much stronger. Are we ready to hit the Zoom? Ready to go?
Yeah.
fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. I had it, yeah. And we do it all the time, Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. At least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Got the music. That's great. It really illustrates what empathy is all about and the basis and the foundation for peer support. Sid and I truly believe in peer support as being the foundation, and with good peer support you can really shorten the path to wellness. And proactively, I think you can actually really shorten the path to wellness if you can get a good peer support system. So we want to ask you to look at yourself and look at your own organizations to see what kind of a peer support program you have in your organization. Is it a good peer support system? Is it trusted? Is it used? Is it utilized in any success? And we are fortunate that there are so many leading edge organizations who are doing so much better and improving their peer support programs. But you may have a leader or a chief who believes in peer support and wants to implement something, but you don't always want to go to the chief's program, or you don't want to go to the human resources program, or you don't want to go to the boss's program. Sid and I truly believe in a peer-led, peer-driven peer support program. That way, there's credibility, there's trust, and you know that you're going to get the help that you need, and you know it's going to be confidential, and you know it's going to be trusted, and you know you're going to get where you need to go with the resources that you need. And peer support alone isn't always the answer. Quite often it is, but often it's not. Sometimes you have to partner with mental health professionals and other options to get people through where they need to go. And peer support is not rocket science. It's not overly difficult. You have to have the heart for it, the desire, the ability, and you have to be well to do it as well. So do you have a peer support system in place for your organization? Is it peer-driven? Is it confidential? One of the most important things is when you develop a peer support system is to make sure that you have the support of everybody. If you can go to your bosses, go to your association, show them what you want, show them what you need, and make sure that everybody's on board and you do it together as opposed to in conflict with each other. If you're going to work in conflict and try and set something up, it's not going to work as well as if you work hand in hand with the support of others. And you need the funding. You need the bosses to pay for it. And you need that financial support to get it up and running. And you need the training. So it's very, very important to make sure that you're funded, you're supported. You need to be safeguarded as well. We were talking, I know Gary Ruby was talking about going into the ICE unit and the child exploitation units, and so many police organizations have safeguarded units where when you go into these units, you're mentally assessed before you go in to make sure that you're healthy for that particular position. We believe this is the case for peer support people as well, because peer support people are mostly in surviving their journey of mental health. Survived, lived experience people are your best peer supporters. The Mental Health Commission of Canada has said that, and we believe that as well. But you need to be in a healthy place to deliver peer support and to provide that. Otherwise, you're going to cause yourself some grief. So if you're safeguarded and checked and tested to make sure that you are healthy to do peer support, then you're going to get a good team member and you're going to get a good team. And you have to be organized for crisis response. You have to be able to hit the ground running and do what you have to do to get the job done. One of the things that we do very well is that we respond our frontline services people, police, fire, EMS, we're here as a police conference, but we have all our brothers and sisters here. When the muck pile hits, we get in there, we roll up our sleeves, and we get the job done. And we do it really well. And frontline services members are more resilient than most. We're tough. We can do it. But every once in a while, you know, we all have our Achilles heel. Every once in a while, either an impactful event or a death of a child or a death of a colleague or something can overwhelm us and overwhelm our ability to cope. So what we do well also is that we respond to crisis. But we're doing so much better at responding to crisis with interventions and crisis support, CISM teams and peer support. We're doing it well, and we're doing it way better than we did before, and people are taking it. The younger generation are much more receptive. When Sid and I have started many moons ago, you know, lots of moons, some longer than others, we sucked it up. When I was involved in my shooting in 1984, it was all I could do to show up the next day and go out and get an impaired arrest, just to show people that I was still strong. I was dying inside, but I had to show up and show that I was strong, because if they didn't see you, they were looking at you, they were watching you, there to see how tough you were. Now we don't have to do that. Now it's okay to take a couple of days off. Now it's okay to show your emotions and show your vulnerabilities, as Gary says. And we're much more in tune with that. We've come a long way. So we do respond well to crisis, and we take care of our own. But we can do so much better. We react well, we show up, but what if we were to be more proactive? We react well, we can be more proactive. There are things that we can do to put in place to put in an early intervention system. There are early intervention strategies that we can put in place. And if we only have a certain amount of time here, but Sid and I can talk to you all day. Buy us a coffee and we'll fill you in on what we know from our experiences. It's pretty cheap, actually. And maybe your organization will hire us, who knows. But we're happy to give our advice over the phone, or if you come through town, we'll sit and fill you in for free on all our experiences, because we've been there. We've developed teams. They work, they're functioning really well. And people are getting saved, and people are getting helped. Let's go back a bit.
Okay. Okay.
Yep. There are things that you can put in place to make sure that you become proactive. And these are just a couple little tidbits. We have a whole list of them. Every organization has a records management system. You have the ability, whether you have Versadex or Niche or whatever, you can create a program that picks off the top 10 terrible calls. You look at the ICISF model in the United States, and you can transcribe that into a program that kicks out feedback from the top 10 calls, so that your peer support people have a list to look at every Monday morning and be proactive. Instead of waiting for people to fall flat on their face, be proactive and say, that call is probably going to get you. Let's go have a coffee and talk about it. See how you're doing. And the sheer fact that somebody's reached out to you makes all the difference in the world, as opposed to waiting, you know, my organization doesn't care. Your organization does care about you, because your peer support system has reached out for you. And the neat thing about it, as your supervisors don't know about it, your bosses don't know about it, your peer support people have picked it on, they're dealing with it, and hopefully you never have to deal with it again. There are other things you can look at: missed court, sick time, missed pay duties, use of force reports. There's all sorts of things that you can pick off and proactively look at behavior changes to see if your guy or your girl's okay. I could go on and on, but there's so many different things that you can do. So we're going to talk about health, healthy lifestyle. Sid and I believe in physical fitness. I don't know if anybody wants to mess with that there on the left, because some of us finished the 22 push-up challenge and are forced to be reckoned with. Keep it there. So it's very important to have an exercise regime, because if you have an exercise regime, that it will keep you physically healthy and it'll keep you mentally healthy. And it's so important to do that. And together, We can bounce ideas. The 22 push-up challenge was so much fun. It got us, well, I have my chest is now in the same time zone as my belly, right, and I'm very proud of that. Sid's way ahead of me, I'm just trying to keep up. And Judy is a machine. Nobody can keep up with her. But in terms of physical fitness, you also, there's a really neat study, a Harvard study. It's like a 70-year study, and you can look at it on TED Talk. And it's about relationships and the value of relationships. Many of you probably already know about it, but I encourage you, if you don't, to have a look at it. It's very inspiring. And you don't have to have a spouse to have a relationship. You can engage with loved ones, your family, your children, your best friends, your parents, your siblings, and engaging with those people who are very special in your life. And stick with positive people. Discard the negative ones. They're just a waste of time. Really stick with those people and engage with them and enjoy your time with them. And you will live a long life, and you will not get sick as easy as well. The studies have shown that. It's pretty simple, and it's a whole lot of fun. So we encourage you to find your inner child. Put on your onesie, find your inner child, go out and have some fun. Maybe come to work with your underwear on the outside of your pants, just for fun. Jonathan will call that exposure therapy. And
That's if you don't wear pants.
oh, truth be known, the bylaws cover that in Barrie, don't they? And just do something silly. Have a whole lot of fun. My father, at 84 years old, hasn't grown up, so I have decided I don't have to grow up either. And when he lost his motorcycle license 2 years ago, he hopped onto the back with me, and we've been having a blast. We were talking about that earlier. So find your inner child, go have some fun. And as a good friend told me a year ago, when I really needed it, be kind to yourself. So I'll encourage you people to be kind to yourself. Take care of yourselves first. Take care of your families. And as a peer group, make sure you take care of each other. That's it for us.
So we're heavy topic, and a lot of people haven't necessarily explored what that topic really means. And like Sid said, the moral injury, this is only my personal opinion, and opinions are like a lot of things, everybody has one, but that's what, to me, that's where we're really losing a lot of our members. We're not losing our members just because of a diagnosis of something, whether it's depression or post-traumatic stress, but we're missing those diagnoses. We're missing those people seeing that within our coworkers. Doesn't matter whether you're fire, EMS, or police. And I think it's really important that we understand that concept, because that concept, without having the other two parts and not having that third part, is where we're letting a lot of ourselves and our coworkers down. So we're going to break. Kyle is going to speak after, but we're going to do our break now. We'll do a 15-minute break. Before you go for break, though, I'm going to get everybody to stand up. And we're going to do hockey bones to at least 3 people. And when you're doing that, you're going to tell them you're awesome.